Do you happen to have siblings? And if you do, if I were to ask you and your siblings about your childhood, would you guys have the same story or very different stories? So that's what we're talking about today, stories and the power of being an adult. So a core need as a child is to be safe, to feel loved, and to belong. And it's basically our parents' jobs to meet those needs as best that they can. The challenge is things get in the way of that. We have traumas, and it could be big T traumas, some big events, or small T traumas where they're just repeated events of neglect that can very much change our brains and change the way we function. But it goes even beyond that. We can have seemingly things that to one sibling might have been very minor, and to another sibling, they made a story about it that just got infused in their life and then now is affecting how they live their life. I've done it, you do it, we all do it, and it's just so interesting to be aware of how this is working and how this is happening. And basically, we just get wired. And so it's very interesting. For example, my husband grew up in an environment where it was like walking on eggshells. And they just had to be very aware of the dominant person in the house. And all of them are high strung. And you can say, well, is that nature? Is it nurture? It's very interesting how they're all very just higher strung. And I can definitely tell, even from my experience in my 22-year previous marriage, it took me a long time to rewire the tenseness that I felt at all times from also feeling like I was walking on eggshells. So it's interesting how these patterns get wired into our brains. But as adults, we can change and we have the power to. So let's talk about some examples of how these stories and how these circumstances play out. One thing I want to distinguish. We have circumstances. That's just if I were to be a very bland tax attorney or a very bland accountant, just the facts of things that happened. But that actually isn't what affects our feelings and our actions and our results. It's actually how we interpret that and the stories we tell ourselves. And then it's the repeat of those stories that create beliefs. And that is how we live. And so it's very, that's why we can be with I have 3 other siblings. That's why, we each interpreted our childhood very differently and have different ramifications from it. And I'll get into the details of that too, because it is kind of interesting. So let's give some other examples. It could be where possibly the parents fight violently, and the child adopts an idea that it's not safe to be in a relationship. And they find out as an adult that they're constantly, when they get too close to someone, they start to push them away, but they don't know why. And it's this subconscious story that relationships are not safe, that they adopted from their childhood. So that's very interesting. Another example is maybe somebody was bullied in junior high or experienced some bullying. And they could have adopted a belief from that circumstance that in order to survive, they needed to be strong and powerful. And so every relationship they have to be the dominant one. Otherwise, they feel threatened and they feel vulnerable. And it comes from this belief that they've adopted when they didn't even know that they were adopting it. And then another example could be like something as simple as the parents are always rewarding them for good grades, but they didn't feel exactly loved. And so this actually identifies more with me, as I definitely got more attention upon achievement. And I think that's like a common parent thing that we do. But as a child, I think I adopted some of this. I'm not enough. I'm not enough on my own. I need to achieve in order to be enough. And then it was constantly a driving factor for me until I worked through that and know that I'm more than enough, just because I'm a child of God like all of us. But I really had to change my belief and change my thinking. So it's just very interesting how that all happens. You have the circumstance, and then we've adopted a belief attached, or a thought attached to that circumstance, and we repeat that thought. Because once we repeat a thought, we have what we call in our brains our lifeguard and our lawyer. And so let's review that. So all of our brains have a lifeguard and a lawyer. We have a part of our brain, the lifeguard, that constantly wants to keep us safe, that constantly wants to keep us in the familiar, that's constantly reminding us of potential fear and danger and this and that, which is helpful in certain circumstances, but many times it gets overprotective and wants to keep us so safe that we're in a little kiddie pool with a life jacket and no water in the pool. So we just have to know there's a lifeguard in our brains that is constantly reminding us that we could be in danger and we need to be safe. Then we have the lawyer, which is super interesting because the lawyer it's not like a positive or negative lawyer. It's just you give it the information. You say, lawyer, I'm not safe in the world. And the lawyer does its job. It looks for evidence. It looks for past evidence. It looks for evidence going on right now. It's always looking for evidence. But the lawyer would do evidence if I said, I'm safe in the world, and this is a great world. Then the lawyer goes to work and looks for evidence that way. And so you can see how easy it is for just a thought to become the lawyer finding more and more like, hey, there's more evidence, to becoming a belief. But that doesn't make it true. We basically are, tell ourselves lies and different things that could be really impacting us. So it's very interesting to see how that works. Unfortunately, as children, it makes it more challenging because they say up to about 7 years of age, a child, they don't have the adult brain. So a child, when they experience things, will always find a way to blame themselves. Even though they're not responsible for their parents fighting, they're not responsible for their parents' divorce, they're not responsible for maybe their parents working all the time and not being able to give them the attention that they felt like they wanted. They're not responsible, so it's just a child isn't responsible for any of that. Child isn't responsible for if they get molested. A child, and we all know that as adults. But the child brain in us, or, our child brain, it didn't know that. So the child, how they adapted its beliefs and thinking was to always blame themselves and to take responsibility. And that's a great way to become a people pleaser. Because if you're constantly trying to appease a parent or being the solution person within your family system, that's wired in you. That's what you had to do to survive. And so being a people pleaser is what you do now because we're part of the pack. And that's another way, another example of being wired. So it's just very interesting. So basically these ideas and beliefs, they will affect our relationships. They'll affect our, as we're trying to, especially if we're trying to strive for bigger and better things, that's when these stories really come pounding down. If we're trying to evolve into having a healthier relationship with our spouse or trying to have healthier relationships with potential dating partners because we seem to choose kind of the same person that we don't want to choose anymore, all of those growth opportunities will bring in these stories, and that's these subconscious stories. Most of them are not in our awareness, but they're constantly being played out. Because the subconscious is 90% of what's driving us rather than our conscious mind. And that is why it's super, super important to kind of clean up our subconscious and understand it with compassion and really know what's going on there. Are you a chronic people pleaser? Do you overgive, overfunction, pretty kind, and you're just tired, or maybe even a little bit resentful? Or are you wondering wow, is this all to life? Is this how it works? Because I kind of feel like I'm going through the motions. Well, that's what the Unravel Notebook is for. It's 61 days to unravel our thinking, beliefs, and live a life intentionally as we connect closer with God, ourselves, and others so we can be more confident and live brighter in this world. So what happens when, some ramifications of unprocessed stories and different things is we'll want to soothe ourselves, we'll buffer, we'll soothe, we'll want to control things, we'll maybe lack control, we'll have addictions. A lot of addictions come from reasoning that came from childhood. I dealt with somebody as a client that had a chewing addiction and found out that he had a belief that he was powerless and out of control as a child, which actually kept him safe and was very helpful. Because a lot of these beliefs that we have as children, or these beliefs we come with, kept us safe and were good for a period of time, but now don't serve us. Now it's not helpful. And so that belief was actually making him want to soothe and wanting him to, drawing him to chewing. So once he worked through those beliefs, understood where it came from, and that it was actually, a belief that served him at the time, he was able to transform that belief to something that actually accommodated what he wanted to do, which was not to chew. So it's very interesting how these things, these stories and beliefs can make us want to soothe, buffer, be addicted to excess, to not enough. It can really affect our identity, which is our deep beliefs, like I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm different, I'm not lovable, all of those things. And that can really affect us as we go out in the world in all aspects of our life, with business, with our kids, with everything. So that's really impactful. It can also affect how we relate and attach to others, because it's very interesting how our attachment is very much from what we learned as an attachment style. So we could be the type of, it was kind of funny, I shouldn't say funny because it wasn't funny at the time, but looking back at my previous relationship, when there was conflict, which there wasn't allowed to be conflict because he would stonewall me, which was an attachment of, an isolation attachment. And for me, I would, feel this disconnect, and I wanted to go closer to him, and that was more of an anxious attachment. So that created this flux that was not healthy, and both of us were not attaching in a healthy way. And so the whole idea is just to attach in a really healthy way, which is great, because now with my husband Michael, and now we just can deal with conflict and give each other space we need, and also work it out. And there's not the anxiousness, and there's not the avoidance. And it's really a beautiful thing. But that was because we did the work to change ourselves. So it's the strangest thing. Most of us don't want to repeat things we'll say. It's like, I don't want to be like my parents in this way. And it's super common that we end up doing the same things because we automatically create what is familiar. And again, that's what the lifeguard helps us do. That's what the story helps us do. Our brain keeps me safe by recreating childhood because, again, that's familiar. So that's why, in the Bible, it talks about how if you cause a child to stumble, you should put a millstone around your neck and be thrown into the sea. Because that's, I think God, Jesus in this case, was saying that, when we hurt a child, it can have such deep ramifications that it's just awful. And that's what he was trying to go for in that analogy. So the good news is, woohoo, as adults, we can do the work. We can heal. We can create familiar, healthy patterns. It is in our power. It is in our ability to change. We can do it. And it looks differently for each of us as far as what we feel called to do, how we want to do that. First, we do have to decide that, hey, I can see that something is preventing me from getting to where I want to go. I'm having these patterns I don't like, and there's some work that needs to be done. And that's when we're like, okay, I need to probably work through this. And we're going to make that decision and pursue our health, and which is just amazing to me. So how do we do that? So we can do it by ourselves. And we can do, there's a lot of books, podcasts, there's a lot of things we can do. That is why I wrote the Unravel notebook, which is 61 days prompts to help us to go deeper and help us to figure out some of those stories and help us reconnect with God, ourselves, others in an intentional manner to live brighter. So we can do it ourselves through lots of different resources. We can do it in community. So I have the Instagram community and my Facebook community, Live Brighter with Tara. And I'm super passionate about the Healing Container community. I've led a number of women's groups where it's just so powerful, where we realize how human and how the things that happen to us are very common, and it's just super uplifting. And that's one reason why I do, community coaching basically in small groups, and the next one is starting in the fall. But that is just super powerful, that healing container. Another option is counseling, and a counselor can specialize in EMDR, and that's what I use, if it's a trauma where you get that physical, emotional reaction when you think of it. EMDR is a great resource for that. A somatic therapist, so that's another counseling. A life coach, so again, the difference between a counselor and a life coach is, Counselors are more like if things are not functioning, they help with that. And a life coach believes that like you're trying to get to this new area and you're having some limitations in that, and that's where we step in. But we really believe that you have all the answers within you. So it's more about creating an awareness of yourself and figuring out exactly how you want to move forward. Another thing with that is like I am a life coach and a hypnotherapist, which is interesting because when I first heard about hypnotherapy, I thought of the fair and how people were acting like chickens on stage. Well, get that out of your mind, because if you associate that, you'll never want to do it. But hypnotherapy is actually a really amazing natural state of mind that, like, when you're watching a movie and you're really into it, or you're driving home and you get home and you don't remember the drive, that's a hypnotic state. And they use hypnotherapy a lot with athletes, but it's basically a way to put the conscious mind asleep so we can go to the subconscious mind. And as the hypnotherapist, it's super powerful because we consciously don't understand sometimes why we've adopted this belief. And so I go into, the subconscious, and you don't feel hypnotized, you just are relaxed, and you can pull up where you've adopted those beliefs and how it served you at that time and how it's no longer serving you, and change that part to actually come up with something that actually is serving your goals. It's really beautiful, powerful, and quick, which I actually really like, because I'm like, I don't want to work with someone for a year and still be working with that same challenging belief system when we can just go to the root of it and get that rewired. So that's what I do. If you're interested in that, you can go to the website livewriter.info and you can sign up for a 10-minute consultation to see if it's something for you. I do packages of life coaching, hypnotherapy packages, and that's a great opportunity. I really think like investing in ourselves is the biggest and best investment we can ever do. And I love, like today I have a meeting with my kids and we're talking about investing and we're talking about different aspects and all of that, because I always try to train my kids in those areas. And I really believe the biggest investment we can do is in ourselves. And that's because like where I work for Keller Williams as a realtor as well. And the philosophy, which is so good, is be, do, have. If we want to have, we have to do the things to have it, but we also have to be the person to have it. So that being and creating the do and the have is really powerful. So I feel like we're put on earth to grow and not to be a product of our circumstances. And as I talked about before, a lot of our circumstances isn't about the circumstances, it's about our thoughts about them and the stories we've attached to that. So we get to choose. We are adults. We can be the products of growth and healing in our own lives. And I just think that makes God smile as he sees all of us just living up to our potential and living brightly. So grow 1% at a time. I believe in you. Have a great day.